Shalom and welcome to Nazarene Israel. My name is Norman Willis. We've had internet issues today, and we also had other technical issues, recording issues. So what we're going to do, we're going to re-record the first half, more or less, of the presentation, and then we'll hook it up with what we do have of the recording from before. So you'll get the first half as a re-record, and then you'll get the presentation as it was given. So welcome to our Midrash presentation on Parasha Kedoshim, Parasha the set-apart ones, Parasha the ones who care enough about Yahweh to set themselves apart from the world. Now, just a warning, I am autistic, so that means I'm very direct. I just have to tell things like they are, try to speak them in as much love as I can. But I'm speaking on behalf of the house of Joseph. So this is diplomatic content as we attempt to reestablish the bonds with our long lost and estranged brothers in Judah. Actually, we are the ones who have been lost. So ultimately, we are Israel friendly. Now, I want to mention something here, and we're going to wrap it in together. There was just this week, just kind of news flash, so to speak, Benedictine College. There were many articles all through the internet. So Pope Francis effectively said that all religions are pathways to Elohim. So now what he actually said was, he said, all religions are a path to God, or we would say Elohim, but he said God. He says they are like different languages, different idioms to get there. So in other words, all religions are the same. But God is God for everyone. He says there's only one God, and our religions, our languages, our religions are languages. They're like languages, pathways to God. He says some are Sikhs, some are Muslims, some are Hindu, some are Christians, but they are different paths. So we are going to take strong exception to that. But I was so blessed this week. We had just an amazing week. Thank you to everyone who's been praying for this ministry. We had just an amazing week. We were preparing for we had the discipleship meeting, first day of Feast of Sukkot. Then we had the transmission. Praise Yahweh, it worked. We have some microphone issues. We have some other, please pray for our ability to transmit. Just let me say this. I hope no one is expecting a show, because that's not what we're about here. What we're about is participant sport. Okay, this is a team effort. This is a family team effort is what we're trying to build here. So we're going to do our best. We've got several challenges going on, but we're going to give you our best because we're trying to serve Elohim and establish Yeshua's word for those who truly love him and who want to enter into the right relationship with him. So, but I was so blessed. We did the discipleship meeting. It was really a blessing. And then we had the transmission that worked well. That was a blessing. So all sorts of blessings. So then we have to go get our 4 species so we can set up our sukkah. And so off we go. And so we knew where willows were because we'd seen willows before. And we knew we'd seen palm trees all over the place because it's Colombia, right? So of course there's palm trees everywhere. But what we didn't realize is that what we have been seeing are palm trees in people's yards, because the climate here, it's not hot like you'd think Colombia. It's up in the highlands, so it's cool. What you put will grow. I mean, you can bring in, but they don't grow natively. You have to plant them. So every palm tree that we saw was on someone's house. So, or on someone's land. So we're praying as the sun is starting to go down. We're running out of time. We're like, we want to get the 4 species. So we're praying, Yahweh, please give us the 4 species. What do we do? Which way do we go? So we were thinking to go right, and I'm praying, and I hear left. So, okay, off we go left. So we go left, and we're going. I hear like back to the town where we are. So I say that, and so we're driving, and there's a palm tree. It's not on someone's land. It's on public land. Well, kind of. So it's an Esavite country. And so they put up shrines, shrines of Miriam and those that they call Catholic saints and these kind of a thing. So they'll have a little a little shrine area there that you can walk into, or if you have a moto, you can pull in, this kind of a thing. And so we pulled over, like, I don't know, a little ways down the road, and then we're praying, Father, we don't want to, we don't want to take something from a shrine area. That's not. So it was like, go. Okay. So off we go. So we go there to the shrine, and there's no statue in it. We don't know whether it's down for maintenance or we don't know what it is, but it's like, we're just praying and trying to follow his voice. And so he leads us here. The statue's gone. It's like, is this a sign? What does this mean? So we get our banana, our palm leaves, because yeah, banana palms, they'd be kept on someone's yard because they will grow here, but you can't cut down someone's food tree. That doesn't work. That's not polite. That's not being good neighbors. So so we get the palms, and we're, thank you, Yahweh, thank you, Yahweh. So we get back, and then we're going to go, we work behind computers on cameras and lights and all day. So we go for a walk and talk to work out the issues of the day. So we're walking and talking. We're talking about this, how we're going to serve the people, how we're going to further the Great Commission, how we're going to do all these things. And here's this educated Colombian man with these two very well-mannered small dogs. And it says something when small dogs are well-mannered like that. And he was like, good afternoon, how are you? And so it's like, oh. And so he obviously stopped to talk with us. So turns out he is I want to say dean. He's the rector. He's the director of the local Catholic university. And he invited us to come to tour his facility and to preach. In fact, well, not to preach, but he said that we could talk with the students and talk with the faculty. And so we believe that this has to do with this news this week. This is like the general of the army, so to speak. General of Asav's army is telling all of his commanders that all paths are equally true, and therefore you should investigate in this kind of a thing. So I don't know. I don't know if that's what it was, but that's the old saying: never let a good apocalypse go to waste, right? So we know what they're working on. We know they're working on a temple. So this third temple that's coming up, and if you for brothers in Judah, if you don't know this, so the renewed covenant says you will have a third temple, but it's not going to be a Tanakh temple. It's going to be a Talmudic temple, and it will have papal involvement. So there's a big plan to have a war, and then of course a crisis, and then of course you have to have some hero give you a pre-planned resolution. And part of that pre-planned resolution will be the third temple. So it will be fulfilled, just like prophecy says, it will be fulfilled. It will not be in accordance with the specifications in Ezekiel for the fourth temple, but this is what it will be. It will be respect for all people on the Temple Mount, and as the Asavite mystery Babylonian system attempts to replace the worship of Elohim on his Temple Mount. So that's again why I don't want to say sitting this temple out, but we have a big job to do called the Great Commission. And it must not be the great omission, at least not when we go for the day of judgment, because that won't end well. Let me get some liquid. So we are starting, we call this level 2 because it's the two houses. It's Judah and Joseph. So this series is the Genesis 35 and verse 11 alliance series. And verse 12 says that Joseph comes home. But Elohim said to him, I am El Shaddai, to our mutual forefather Israel, I am El Shaddai. Be fruitful and multiply. A great nation, Judah, amazing nation, and a company of Ephraimite or returning Ephraimite Gentile Christian nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. So this is the history that we've seen. This is what we see here today. So you have a great nation, Judah. You've got both the kingship and the Levitical priestly tribes and Benjamin. And then, well, there's been a lot of ingrafting and outgrafting. We'll talk about that in the documentary. And then you have a company of Protestant Josephite Christian nations, and they're in support of Judah. They're in support of the land of Israel. So particularly you have, we'll talk about this in other places, you have the prophetic tribe of Ephraim in the United States of America, and Ephraim wants to come home. So Ephraim is siding with Judah, and our job is to form the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim. It is stick of Joseph that's related to this company of Protestant Josephite Christian nations. And you have to separate between Ephraim and Manasseh and all that. But that's what it says. So with respect, if we compare this to the Talmud, and the Talmud tells us that there's only Judah and nobody else. You have B'nai Noach, slaves. That's is different. So that's level 2. That's level 2. This is level 3. So we come here to renewed covenant reference, Matthew, chapter 13 and verse 33. So another parable Yeshua spoke to his disciples. And he said, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal until all was leavened. Okay, so 3 measures of meal. What is meal? Meal is ground or denatured seed. What kind of seed? The seed of Abraham. So what are the 3 groups that you have here? You have Judah, you have Joseph, and you have Ishmael. We'll talk about that in the Abraham Accords series. There's a special juncture between these 3. And then there's also another juncture we'll talk about in level 4 with the 4 horses series that includes Esav. Okay, now Esav, we're going to use we'll talk about this in other places, but again, the house of Joseph spent a time, times, and half a time, 1,260 years in the house of Esav. We were thoroughly absorbed into the house of Esav. Okay, so there's a lot of cleansing that we have to do. We have to set ourselves apart from the house of Esav, but we're also witnessing to our cousins in the house of Esav. So it's very difficult at times, but anything worthwhile typically is hard to do. It's difficult, so we need to work at it. So we have in Sodot, secrets, or Hitgalut, exposition or revelation, there's a few names even in Sardis, chapter 3 and verse 4. You have a few names even in Sardis who have not defiled their garments, and they shall walk with me in white, for they are worthy. So, what this is saying is that even if we're looking at certain churches, even though their doctrine may be anti-Yeshua, they may be anti-Messiah, meaning a replacement for the Messiah, a substitute for the Messiah. Even though their doctrine may be wrong, there's still people in Esav who are lovely people, and we've met practicing Catholics and just lovely people. They're trying to do their very best. They just don't have the revelation knowledge yet. So we were just praising Yahweh. We met this Colombian man, very well mannered. He's walking his 2 dogs. I mean, what are the odds? What are the chances? You're praying to Yahweh for a banana palm. There's the banana palm. We're praying that it won't be defiled. The idol is gone out for maintenance or whatever. And then we get home, get back to 2 separate houses. But we get back to the town that we're living in, and then we're walking and talking. And then there, the dean or the rector of the school is inviting us to come inside. He gives us the full tour, shows us everything, offers to us to talk with his faculty, talk with his students. He's I guess this is, the commander of the army has spoken. And so he's inviting us to come talk to his students to represent our religion. So I just want to ask you, please, for your prayers for this. And if this goes well if all goes, I mean, we might even have an opportunity to minister to the people in the regular Catholic cathedral. So we'll just have to see how it goes. So I ask you, please, to pray for this, and please pray for those who are walking in the assembly or Sarda. So you got 7 different assemblies, or 7 different spirits, basically 7 different kinds of people, 7 different personality types in the house of Joseph in these end times. Or I guess this would be the house of Asaph, in my understanding. But in Christendom, in the Nazarene, in the house of Yeshua, so to speak, you've got those who are trying to obey him and those who are trying to ignore him, those who are trying to replace his way, kind of like they're replacing the Tanakh with the Catechism. I'm not sure how that works. Okay, but I want to thank you for your prayers for this live format. Let me get a little more liquid here. What we are trying to do is we are trying to establish real, true, genuine dialogue between the house of Judah and the house of Joseph. And so that so that Joseph can be joined to Judah, and together we can form the Genesis 35 alliance. So I want to thank you for your prayers, those of you who are praying for us, for your prayers for the live format. We just feel it's important to offer people an opportunity for fellowship, hopefully put it in front of more people, and also put it in front of Brother Judah. And we want this dialogue. And we know it's not going to be easy. We know it's going to be, you've got 2 brothers who are effectively estranged from each other. And there's all sorts of dynamics and all sorts of things going on. Both Judah and Joseph, each in their own particular way, are each doing the wrong thing. And what we're called to do is we're called to come together in the right order in these end times. So that's what we want to talk about. We want to kickstart genuine dialogue. And I think that's great. So praise Yahweh that we're here at this juncture. I'm just amazed at the things Yahweh's providing. He's also, we might end up being able to preach in the Catholic cathedral. So to me, this says that in these end times, we understand there's a deep relationship between Zerah and the Jesuit order. But look at what's happening. Look at how Yahweh is orchestrating things in these end times so that we will be able to reach the house of Asaph, because we can talk about the things that unify us. We have a commonality of belief in a Jewish Messiah. We have a commonality of belief in the renewed covenant. So they don't get the Tanakh yet, but we can talk with them about it, why it's important. Hope to find those lost Abrahamic sparks and bring them out of the nations. Like it says, the house, we will see in Amos, the house of Israel will come out of all the nations. Okay. We want to encourage this dialogue. We appreciate your respectful questions and comments. Sorry about the earlier transmission failure. But we're just re-recording the first half. But we had some really good questions come in. So we wanted to respond to those here, because when you hear a good question enough times, you realize a lot of people have this question. So it's really good questions. Appreciated these questions. He says, how do you explain these verses in the Torah? It says, according to the law, nobody can die for your sins, not even Yahshua. It's sort of a messianic Ephraimite spelling there. So not even Yahshua. And did the Roman soldiers take the role of the high priest? Yes, sorry, I'm not sure what you're getting at there. If you could unpack that for us in the comments, that'd be great. And not quite sure. Just give us a little more detail. But it says, here are the words of our Creator, and we know his words are truth. Amen. The fathers shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers, but rather every man shall be put to death for his own sin. So Deuteronomy, or Devarim 24 and verse 16 says, but everyone, that was Devarim 24 and 16. Now we get Jeremiah 31:30, but everyone shall die for his own iniquity. Amen. Every man that eateth the sour grape, sounds like a King James version, his teeth shall be set on edge. Amen. Jeremiah 31 and verse 30. Then he says, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. The Son shall not bear the iniquity of the Father, neither shall the Father bear the iniquity of the Son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him. Amen. It says, but if the wicked will turn from all his sin that he hath committed and keep all, key word, all, my, Judah, key word, my statutes, and do that which is lawful and right in Yahweh's eyes, he shall surely live. He shall not die. That's Yehezkel or Ezekiel 18, 20, 21. Amen. So he says, if you need more verses, let me know. Shalom. So this is really good question. We really appreciated this question. And we do get this question a lot. I've heard it before, and praise Yah, this is a good time, good opportunity to answer it. So the confusion arises over what's commonly called substitution sacrifice, so to speak. There's actually a more technical term that's more accurate. It's called vicarious or substitution atonement. So if we come to the Wikipedia, and we look up substitutionary atonement. So you type in, substitution sacrifice, it'll give you substitutionary atonement. So it says in English, the word atonement originally meant at one-ment. So you're becoming at one with Yahweh. So it's according to, and then state of redemption, etc. Okay, but so that's what's being described is at one-ment. So when you have something is wrong in a relationship that you care about, whether it's with your brother or your sister or your spouse or your parents or your children or your boss or neighbors or whoever, doesn't matter who it is. When you have a relationship that you care about and you do something wrong, you need to go make atonement. You need to go make at one-ment. You need to become one again. You need to heal the relationship. If you don't heal the relationship, or if you abuse your power, a lot of narcissistic abuse type things go on. Your parents sometimes, they're abusive toward their children, so they don't reason together with their children. Sometimes children need, just need timed out or spanked, but hopefully less is better. So talking with them, helping them to understand, what's, making the relationship whole, basically. Father forbid if anyone has ever cheated on their spouse, making the relationship whole. And then you have to make the relationship with Yahweh whole. So there's a lot of that. That's what the sin sacrifices, that's what the ritual sacrifices are all about, is once your heart is upright, then you go perform the ritual. You go perform the ritual sacrifice. You want to make sure your heart is right first. If your heart is not right, if you're not listening to Yahweh, that's not right. So the question comes up, where is this concept of substitutionary sacrifice in Scripture? A lot of people, they don't know. And I think certain ministries try to promote the idea that it's not in Scripture and this kind of a thing. So, we just take a look at verses like Bereshit or Genesis chapter 22 and verse 7. One moment. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Genesis 22 and verse 7, but Yitzhak, Isaac, spoke to Abraham, his father, and said, my father. He said, Hineni, here I am, my son. Then he said, look, I see the fire and I see the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? So, and then this is early on, talk about Nachmanides patterns. Verse 8, and Abraham said, my son, Elohim will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering. So the two went together. So can we see the idea of a substitution sacrifice or a substitution burnt offering in this passage? Okay. Next is, we just talked about this, last week, I believe. And Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 16 and verse 21. And Aharon shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel and all their transgressions, concerning all their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. Okay, and it says right here, Leviticus 16 and verse 22, The goat shall bear on itself all of their iniquities to an uninhabited land, and he shall release the goat in the wilderness. Okay, so can we see the concept of vicarious atonement here? Can we see a substitution sacrifice? And if we understand that the goats are also symbolic of Yeshua in a way, can we see the link? Can we see the Nachmanides pattern here? Can we see the type and shadow? Okay. Now, Judah does not like Isaiah 53. I don't understand it. I don't understand why. It's like, what are we going to do? Throw that book out? Like, okay. Oh, no, just that chapter, right? Just a chapter. We like the rest of Isaiah, just not chapter 53. It's like, is this why Isaiah was reportedly sawn in two? Why? He's prophesying about Mashiach, Nagid, who came at the end of the Second Temple period. So Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 4, it says, surely he has borne our griefs and he has carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by Elohim, and afflicted. Okay, verse 5, but he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Can we see the idea of substitution here? Verse 6, we all like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and Yahweh has laid on him the iniquity of us all, just like with the scapegoat, just like with the goat for Azazel. Okay, take the iniquities of us all and lay it on the Zugot goat. Verse 10, yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him, because that's how he became king. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, and the different ways to translate this, seems straight to me. He shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Yahweh shall prosper in his hand. Verse 11, he shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Okay, so good question. Can we see the vicarious atonement or the substitution sacrifice in this passage? Verse 12, therefore I will divide him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death. He's hearing Yahweh's voice. He's obeying what Yahweh's voice says, even though it takes him unto the death. He's faithful unto the death, and yet he was numbered with the transgressors. He bore the sin of many and made intercession for the transgressors. That's vicarious atonement. Okay, so now let's come to the next section. This is the Vayikra or Leviticus. We're going to get into commandments here, but before we do that, let's take a stop and let's back up a little bit to get a perspective, because we're trying to weave this parasha together to bring the two houses together. So if we want to bring the two houses together in a right order that pleases Elohim, then what we need to do, we need to know what it was we're supposed to be doing from the beginning. Okay, so Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 2, verse 15. Then Yahweh Elohim took the man, and put him in the Garden of Eden to tend it and keep it. So this is our original occupation. We're supposed to be gardeners. We're supposed to be a family of gardeners who loves each other, takes care of each other, doesn't get jealous of each other, doesn't slay or bully each other, so that together we can tend and keep his garden, his planet. That was what he originally wanted. He still wants that. He still wants that. It's just, in the garden, it was, what is this you have done? It's like, oh no, if you're not going to seek my will with all of your mind, all of your heart, all of your soul, if you're not going to listen for my voice and do what I tell you to do with all you've got, now we're going to have to do things the hard way, and you're not going to like it. It's not going to be fun. There's going to be 7,000 years of warfare. So, and eventually he's going to get us worked back up to where he wants us. And those who want to do his will, those who want to hear his voice and obey his words and not replace them or not ignore them or just plain not do them, okay, those people are going to die. We're going to see that in this parasha. So the next thing we need to know is that, so how's he going to get us there? Okay, so he called us out of Egypt. Okay, he redeemed us from Egypt. So we should be loyal to him for that. We should be loyal to him because of Abraham. We should be loyal to him because of what he did, everything he did for Israel. He should be loyal to him because he sprung us from Egypt. Okay, now he sent Mashiach Nagid. Okay, what's the plan? How are we going to help mankind get back to that state where you have a single family of man listening to the Spirit so they can fulfill the will of the Father in heaven? How are you going to do that? Okay, it's right here. This is the thing Ephraim just doesn't want to do. Matthew chapter 28, because it's too much time, it's too much of their money, too much effort, too much energy. Mercy sakes. Verse 18, and Yeshua came and spoke to them, saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth as Mashiach Nagid, as one like Moses. Verse 19, go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, not just United States, not just Europe, not staying home, not being comfortable, okay, immersing them in my name. Now we'll talk about this in another place, but see, in Nazarene Scripture Studies, Volume 3, we talk about why we immerse in Yeshua's name only. We're open if someone has convincing or compelling evidence. Our studies are not, if you see something wrong in our studies, we want you to tell us. We want to know, because it's not important to us that our studies need to be right because we're going to sell them for $29.95 or whatever. That's not it. Okay, that's the false shepherds. That's the book salesman. Okay, those are the disorganization salesmen. Okay, those are the ones, they're making their money 6 figures a year in some cases. They're making their money and they've got their crowd telling you don't have to obey. Okay, that's mystery Babylon. Whether they use the Trinity or not, whether they immerse in the Trinity combination or not, that's mystery Babylon. But one of the hallmarks is the Trinity, and we'll show that, Father willing, in the Abraham Accords series. But what Yeshua says is, verse 20, he says, teaching them to observe all things. Now, in Hebrew, the word observe would be the word shomer, which is to guard. Okay, so guard, you hedge it about with a protective hedge. We'll talk about that in the next slide. But teaching them to guard, to shomer, to keep, to observe, to obey all things that I have commanded you. All things that I have commanded you. And behold, I guess it helps if I put the slide up. I guess it's the modern version of talking and chewing gum at the same time or something like that. Coordination issue. Autism, coordination. Never been my thing. So Matthew 28 into verse 20. What does Yeshua want us to do? What does he want the disciples to do? We're immersing disciples. What are they going to do? Okay. We're going to teach disciples who want to have that true relationship with Yeshua. We're going to teach them to observe, to keep, to guard, to do everything Yeshua has commanded us. And if we do that, he's going to be with us even to the end of the age. And so, the question, and this is the thing, they always want to say, it's like, well, no, it's just, the commandment is just love now. Just love the Father and love your neighbor. Okay. But if you love your neighbor, according to Hebrew block logic, we'll talk about that, you also have to discipline. It's like if you love your child, you have to discipline your child. If you don't discipline your child, according to King Solomon, it's because you hate him. Okay. So if you don't help your neighbor meet the very high standards for eternal life? Is that because you love him, or is that because you hate him? Or maybe he's not interested. You don't want to cast your pearls before swine. Okay, but there's a discipline component to love. And Yahweh sent his son to get us to build Yeshua's kingdom in his absence. And that's the proof that we love him, is that we lay down our lives in this world to build his kingdom. And if we want ourselves and our children to survive, that's what we need to be busy doing. So, and people say, well, it's just love. It's like, no, there's plenty of stuff. We have to unify on a single foundation with one unified doctrine, which has to be Yeshua's. That's Ephesians 2, 19 through 21, I think 22, actually. Look that up. There's also Ephesians 4. Okay, are all the ministers unifying on a single foundation of apostles and prophets? Or do we have my ministry? Insert my name ministries. Okay, is that Yeshua's ministry? Are we all working together at Yeshua's ministry? Like it says, all 5 gifts working together to build a single body, which is his, a single ministry, which is his? Or are we, this is my ministry? I've listened to ministers boast that they have no relationship with any other ministry. It's like, okay, so you're a rogue evangelist, basically, is what you are. Okay, you're not helping to build Yeshua's kingdom. You're helping to build your own little kingdom, your own little empire. And you think that's serving Yeshua, and that's the opposite of what his word says to do. Oh, but if we all, join hands and ignore what Yeshua really says to do, then we can pretend with the messianic myth, the Ephraimite messianic myth, moving forward. Okay, Acts chapter 15, it says, abstain from 4 abominations so that we can then enter in to relationship with the rest of the body. We have to join in, we have to enter in, we have to throw in. Okay, we're joining a family, we're marrying into a family because of Yeshua's spirit. That's what we're doing. We're grafting into Judaism, or Israelite worship if you prefer, because it's not just for Judah, it's for all 12 tribes. Here's an acid test. Titus 1 and verse 5. The apostolic priesthood appoints the elders, then the elders appoint their deacons, and this is to provide for the correct order in the assembly. And oh, no, you'll have to obey. You get these book salesmen guys. No, you'll have to obey. No, you don't have to do actually what it says. No, just watch my TV show and give your money here to me. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And some of these guys are like netting like 6 figures net. That's their take home. And so, ask yourself, the minister that I'm listening to, do they look like they stepped out of the pages of the renewed covenant? Are they practice? Does their worship look like the worship of the renewed covenant? Or does their worship look like something else? Ask yourself that question. Because do you want to hear the words of the renewed covenant brought into the modern day? Or do you want to hear a replacement for the words of the renewed covenant brought into the modern day? So some of these ministry leaders and teachers, they just plain need to repent, because it's like, the front row seats of hell are going to be filled, I believe, with a lot of leaders and teachers. They knew that what they were teaching wasn't exactly what the renewed covenant says, and yet they're teaching it anyway. Okay. So this word observe, or shomer, okay, so the Hebrew word shomer, Strong's Hebrew 8104, the root word is shamar, and it means to hedge about as with thorns. Like you're putting up a barbed wire fence. You're patrolling with security guards. Okay. That is to guard it, generally to protect it so you can attend to it. This thing is like your baby. You know what I'm saying? This thing is like your family. That's what this is. That's what this, protect your family, protect Yahweh's word. It's that important. Guard it, keep it, do it, protect it, attend to it. We translate it as observe. It's like, well, of course, observe. That's like, you get your field glasses. You're You observe, oh, look, a red speckled hen. Oh, look, you're observing the Torah, yes, from a distance, as opposed to entering into the Torah, so as to live the Torah, so as to to guard the Torah. I don't understand. It's so plain. It's so simple. I don't understand why people don't understand it. So, but now we're coming to the Vayikra, Leviticus 19 and verse 1. Now, here's the keynote. Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying, speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, you shall be set apart. You shall be Kedoshim. You shall be holy if you like. For I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am set apart. Okay, set apart from what? Well, for one thing, for Ephraim, we need to set ourselves apart from Esau. We can go talk to Esau. We can be friendly to Esau. Okay, but if they're embracing all religions, we need to lovingly, gently set ourselves apart from Esau, because that's not the temple we want. That's not the place we want to go. We want to be set apart because Yahweh is set apart. How are we? It's like, with autism, it's like you lose words. It's like, I didn't understand. Like brothers, it's like, how do we have this situation where we have so many people saying, I'm keeping Torah, but they're not doing Torah. They're not performing Torah. I don't understand. It doesn't make sense to me. Can anyone explain it? What Yahweh is asking for us to do, he's asking us to set ourselves apart from the ways of the world. One, so Judah can know who we are, but mostly because this is how we are. This often said that the best indicator of future performance is past performance. So how does Yahweh know if he wants to take us as a bride or not? He's going to take a look and see how we did. Did we read his word? Good. Did we do his word? Hopefully, good. Did we do his word and not our own word, not our own interpretation? Both houses need work. So I want to speak to Ephraim just for the moment. This is something I think Brother Judah, gets this. Maybe they don't apply it to the Tanakh. Maybe they apply it for Talmud. But Brother Judah understands the need basically for everyone to function together as one. Okay, when you're a small nation surrounded by enemies, one way or another, you better respond as a unit or you're going to get wiped out. Okay, so Judah gets that. That's a kingship tribe function. So a kingship is war. Well, Gad is Joseph. Ephraim is also war. But Judah understands the need to function together. So Zechariah calls it bands or bonds, as opposed to Ephraim is beauty. So we have beautiful ideas, but they don't necessarily work because people don't apply themselves with discipline. Judah, maybe they don't necessarily have the right goals, but they band together, they bond together, and they're in a tough spot. They're in a difficult situation. They have to work together. So this is, I think you will see, when you talk about Judah, they generally understand. Verse Leviticus or Vayikra 19 and verse 17, it says, you shall not hate your brother in your heart. Okay, you shall surely rebuke or reprove or correct your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. And again, there's a big discussion between the Ephraimite world and the Jewish world about what is your neighbor. Okay, Ephraim, we're going to extend that as much as possible. We're going to try and help Esau understand what's needed to find the lost Abrahamic sparks. So, but Judah understands the need. It's like with children. If you don't discipline your child, Solomon says, it's because you hate him. And it is. You spare the rod, you're going to spoil the child. Hopefully it's you talk with him first. Hopefully, we're not, there's a right way and a wrong way to do everything. But basically to hold your children accountable to adult standards from the time they're quitting the milk in a loving way. Obviously, some things are age appropriate. Many things are not age appropriate. It has to be done with wisdom and it has to be done with love. Wisdom is the spirit. Love, that's our job. We have to pray for that. We have to choose that. But Judah also understands verse 18. It says, "You shall not take vengeance nor bear a grudge against the children of your people." Now, we'll talk about the Birchat Haminim. We'll talk about a lot of probably Jew hatred, anti-Semitism in the house of Joseph or in the house of Esau. Talk about a lot of things. There's a lot of things we can and need to talk about. But it says, "You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh." So we're going to extend that version. Now, in Hebrew, you have the concept of what they call block logic, and it's a very good concept. That's when two things come together, when you have this verse and then that verse, quite often there's a relationship between them. So, and then you also have other rules, like if something's happening in a passage, like the whole, and sometimes Yahweh just changes the theme, he changes the chapter or whatever, but and that's just what it is. But typically, when there's a long passage, there's a relationship. Obviously, Yahweh's trying to impart the concept. He's trying to help us get his drift. He's trying to help us understand the spirit. So then he's giving us various examples. But one of the examples that we see is that he gives us Hebrew block logic. It's like two sides of the same coin. So you have the loving side and you also have the discipline side. You can't have one side without the other. You can't have love without discipline. And Ephraim, I mean, Ephraim, you see Jews, you see Judah, like, it's like, so Caleb, Kol Lev, the word Caleb means dog, but it's Kol Lev. Like you see dogs in a fight, it's like all heart. They're all in. It's just all heart. They're all in there. Ephraim's more like cats, sorry to say. I mean, if it's a lion, that's a good cat, but Angus Wooten, he was founded him and his wife, Batya, founded the Messianic Israel Alliance. He used to say that serving Ephraim was like trying to herd cats, so it's like when you're feeding them, here they come. There's all sorts of fights about the food. And then when the food runs out, off they go. And that's Ephraim. So we don't have this steadfastness. We don't have this dedication. It's like if you say one word, it's like, and we have this whole thing in the popular culture now about validation, and you have to give affirmative statements. And if you have to give an affirmative statement like at once every 5 minutes or something like that. It's like, okay. We just have to speak the truth in love and let the chips fall where they may, so to speak. And this is the thing, is that if people are wanting to obey Yahweh's word and his ways, then eventually they will get to dwell in his land. It's like with the Garden of Eden. If you listen to Yahweh's voice and do what he says, you get to stay in his garden. He makes life excellent. He makes life wonderful for you. But if you hear Yahweh's voice and decide to do your own thing, like both houses do, out of the land, out you go, and he draws the sword out after, because that's how it goes. So either we're for him or we're to be destroyed. Either we're doing his will or we can end up being pushed out of his land. It's hard, but it's fair. It's a very difficult walk, but it's fair. So this is what we see. But Ephraim, the concept, that these two things go together, okay? Love and discipline in a familial sense, in a brotherhood sense. It's like, please pray with me. I'm praying for Yahweh to raise up the brotherhood among Ephraim so that the house of Joseph might be formed in the hand of Ephraim. Please pray with me for that, because right now it's like herding cats. Everyone comes to get the free food and off they go. Well, how is that Yeshua's will? How is that getting him? How is that investing our mina wisely? Okay, that's burying our mina. Okay. If you're eating what you can and then amscray, that's burying our mina. All righty. So just some questions came up, and as we were going through, so just to mention this, just in passing, along as we're here, Vayikra or Leviticus 19 and verse 19 says, "You shall keep or perform my statutes," obviously. You shall not let your livestock breed with another kind. So he's talking about mixing. Yahweh doesn't like mixing. You shall not sow your field with mixed seed. He doesn't like mixing. Nor shall a garment of mixed linen and wool come upon you. Okay, so he doesn't like mixing. Leviticus 19, starting in verse 33. Now, this is of concern to Joseph. He says, and if a stranger or a ger dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. And just to stick up for our people, that's what Ephraim is. So we were, just like Joseph was sold down into slavery in Egypt. Get some liquid. So again, Nachmanides patterns, type and shadow. This word ger, it's someone who has a relationship with the nation of Israel, but isn't presently walking correctly, or his ancestors weren't. So the point is, verse 33, if a stranger, someone comes in, if returning Gentile Ephraim comes home, okay, you don't enslave him, you don't turn him into a B'nai Noach slave and work him to death. Okay, that's not what it says. It says, and if a stranger or a ger dwells with you, talking like Uriah the Hittite, he dwells with you in your land, you shall not mistreat him. Okay, the stranger who dwells among you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself. Talking about loving your neighbor, because you yourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am Yahweh, your Elohim. So this is of concern for the house of Joseph, because we take a look at this B'nai Noach program, and that's exactly what you're talking about, is enslaving us all, killing off the males, so you can have the women and the children for yourselves. Okay, so Joseph can't come home as long as Judah is still following Talmud. Okay, so I hope whoever's listening, whoever's watching this presentation, Joseph can't come home until Judah goes back to Tanakh. And I said that to Nasi Weiss, or ex-Nasi at this point, Weiss. So we cannot come home under Talmud. We can only come back home under Tanakh. So Leviticus 19 and verse 37 says, therefore you shall observe Ephraim, mercy, well, and Judah. How many times this is, we're talking about being kadosh. We're talking about being set apart. We're talking about being holy. But in Hebrew, kadosh. We're talking about being set apart from the world. That means it's not important that your child plays t-ball. It's not important that you're a member of the Rotary Club. Okay, it's not important to have a vacation rental. It's not important to go flying in your airplane. It's not important to take a vacation to Colorado and then you don't have time for feasts at Sukkot. We have to set ourselves apart. We have to trust him and his word and say, you know what? The things that I'm wanting, maybe that's not what Yahweh wants. Because he's looking for voluntary, Proverbs 31, bridal candidates. So, therefore you shall observe, meaning guard, meaning keep, meaning protect, meaning involve yourself with all, keyword all, for Ephraim, my, keyword my, for Judah, statutes, and all of my judgments. And how plain can it be? And perform them or do them. Ephraim's reading them. Okay, and then he says, I am Yahweh. That means I'm serious. Okay, in Parasha Kedoshim, verse 7, Vayikra 20 and verse 7, set yourselves apart, therefore, and be set apart. For I am Yahweh your Elohim, and you shall keep my statutes, and perform them. Okay, so what that means is when we are reading his word, we need to be reading his word and saying, am I doing this? Am I doing this? And there's a good question. Obviously, the house of Ephraim, we cannot perform the sacrificial law right now because we're not in the land. And Yahweh has again chosen Jerusalem. There are plans to build a third temple. So Melchizedekian altar, while technically permissible, isn't really indicated at this particular point in time. What's more indicated at this particular point in time is for the house of Ephraim to take the Great Commission seriously, to set ourselves apart from the X-Files, to set ourselves apart from Hollywood movies, to set ourselves apart from motorcycle adventures, these kinds of things. Choosing Yahweh, making a decision for Yahweh, putting Yahweh's voice first in our lives. That's what's needed. Well, coming back to Yahweh's commandments, Vayikra 20 and verse 18, this was a question that came in, very good question. So in Vayikra chapter 15, I want to say 2 parashot ago, I'm not sure, but in Vayikra 15, it talks about how if a woman is in her monthly cleansing and her flowers get on a man because he shared her bed without marital relations, but he just got the blood on him, that he would be unclean 7 days, and everything that he would lie upon or sit upon would also be unclean. So this is the reason why, or at least observant Jews, they get separate beds, and that's a good practice. That's something that the house of Ephraim needs to adopt now. But that was for unintentional. So there's just a 7-day uncleanness phase. But here in this parasha, verse Vayikra 20 and verse 18, it says, if a man lies with a woman, and I'm going to say intentionally, during her sickness and uncovers her nakedness, he has exposed her flow, and she has uncovered the flow of her blood. Both of them shall be cut off from among their people because they intentionally violated Yahweh's Torah. So that's what is called in Scripture. That's called the high-handed rebellion, or a rumyad rebellion. So this one thing maybe a lot of Christians don't understand, the sacrificial offering system, okay, that's only for what we would call unintentional sins. So in other words, you broke Yahweh's commandments, and then you realized that you've broken Yahweh's commandments. And it's like, oh no. So you would get your heart right with Yahweh, and then you would go perform the ritual to show Yahweh that, yes, I'm obeying your Torah. But the first thing is to get your heart right. If you don't get your heart right, you're making this ritual, that ritual, the next, you're just killing animals. That's all. You're just shedding blood. That's all you're doing. Okay, so this is, again, the idea of substitution sacrifice is, this providing these animals. It's like your sin, this animal dies in place of you. It's how would you say? It's a picture of when we break Yahweh's will, when we're not listening for Yahweh's voice, that's sin. And sin leads to death. The wages of sin is death. So when we come to Yahweh and say, Father, I'm so sorry, I've sinned against you, please forgive me. Okay, and then you know what to do. Now you have a ritual. So you can, your ritual's done, and now the relationship is restored. There's at-one-ment. So there's a substitution sacrifice kind of a thing. It doesn't take away sin nature. That's the job of the Holy Spirit. That's the job of submitting to the set-apart Spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, and then handing over the steering wheel and the keys. You tell me what to do. That is what restores sin nature. That is what replaces sin nature. It takes that sin nature away because there's a substitution, an invasion by the set-apart Spirit. You have to welcome her in. You have to make sure she's happy. She's a lady. If you don't keep her happy, she won't stay. She will go. That's how she is. She's royalty. You have to treat, I don't want to say queen or I don't know. That's not my department. But she's a lady. You have to treat Lady Wisdom correctly, or she will go. So we have to keep all of his. We have to be in. We have to be all in. We have to remain connected in the vine. We have to buy in. We have to bring our A game. We have to bring all we have to the fight. Okay, we have to do what he says so that the land may not vomit us out. So again, to become set apart ones, to become Kedoshim. So he says, and you shall be set apart to me, for I, Yahweh, am set apart. And I have separated you from the peoples that you should be mine. Okay, well, how are we going to serve him if we don't set ourselves apart from the peoples? And he is set apart. How are we going to serve him? When Yeshua comes for his bride, how is he going to take us back to his father's house when we don't keep his father's ways? We read about his father's ways, but we don't keep his father's ways. How impressed is Yeshua going to be? I mean, can you imagine if you're engaged to be married in the human realm and yeah, okay, bride, if you want the wedding to be on, this is what I need you to do. I need you to learn about me, learn about what I want, learn about how I can help serve my father. And then, get yourself ready for a busy life because we're going to be serving Yahweh together. Oh, and then it's the day before the wedding. Oh, she's not doing that. Okay, are you still going to take her? Parable the minas. Okay, well, we need to bring up again a lot of throat clearing, so to speak, before we can get into it. But we talked about last week, just to bring it up again. This is just something the Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, or the Maimonides, excuse me, erase that. So the Ramban, so Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, or Nachmanides, not Maimonides, Nachmanides, or the Ramban is what I meant to say. His commentary on Genesis 12 and verse 6, that history repeats itself. Whatever has happened to the patriarchs is a sign for the children. So what happened before, we're going to see the same thing again, because we see the same spirits. We see the same family patterns. We see all those things. Okay, so now for the prophet Amos, what we need to know about Amos is that Amos was a Jewish shepherd from, I believe, Tekoa, and he was sent to preach to our forefathers in the northern house of Joseph during the time of Jeroboam II. So you had the original King Jeroboam I. Excuse me, yeah. So you had King David, King Solomon. King Solomon whipped us, and then his son Rehoboam threatened to scourge us, which can be deadly, lead permanent scarring, permanent damage, these kinds of things. So we don't like this kind of abuse. It's the older on the younger. It's Parasha Vayeshev. It's all the way back to the Garden of Eden with Cain, the older, slaying Havel, the younger. So this is a bad pattern. So it needs to stop. It's possible for it to stop if we will all listen for his voice and do what he says and override our carnal nature. That's the purpose of the indwelling of the set apart spirit, is to help us bring our carnal nature into submission. Okay, well, so Amos was sent to minister to our forefathers in the northern house of Joseph, and it was a hard sell. I mean, we can think about the way things are, for example, in the United States. So certain presidents, they might be financially successful. They can lead the nation to financial success, militarily successful. They can, they build up the military and get prepared for war. So the nation can be both financially and militarily successful, but not in obedience to Yahweh. Okay. That was the situation in Amos 9. And as we see, Amos 9, that is over the house of Joseph in the end times. So again, with Nachmanides, we take a look at these patterns. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. It's the same spirit. It's the same spirit in each generation. We have to choose what spirit we're going to submit to. So, with the apple not falling far from the tree, you had King Jeroboam the first. He set up his own priesthood for us. So we broke away from Yahweh, but now we needed a replacement. We need a substitute Torah. So the beginnings of Mystery Babylon entering in again. You're saying you're serving Elohim, but you're not doing what he says to do. That's not what you're supposed to do. Yeah, that's false worship. So King Jeroboam set up houses of idols, golden calves, houses of idols, false houses of worship. He set up a false priesthood. Everything is a perfect prophetic shadow picture, or Nachmanides point, of how Ephraim began a slide into, or I say Joseph at this point. The house of Joseph, all 10 tribes, began their slide into, you could say, into the house of Esau in Rome. So in other words, they're sliding away. They're establishing their own worship. And again, we'll talk about how Judah does the same thing in other places. But so we're seeing basically a foreshadowing of the church system. And by church system, I'm including messianism. Because again, your average messianic Ephraimite, so to speak, he's reading the word and he thinks he's doing what the word says to do, but he's not performing the points that the word says to do. Okay, so Amos's message was everyone needs to turn back. Okay, so now this is the end times. We're talking about the Amos chapter 9, and this is the end times with the house of Israel. I got a formatting issue there. We'll try and get that corrected in the next. I'm still learning the technology, that's for sure. Amos 9 and verse 1. He says, "And I saw Yahweh standing by the altar." I assume these are the false temples. And he said, "Strike the doorposts," or the capitals. So strike the pillars so that the thresholds will shake and the whole thing is going to come tumbling down. And it's going to break them on the heads of them all. They're still following King Jeroboam I's worship. They've still got false houses of worship, a false priesthood. They're teaching a false doctrine. They're teaching a replacement of my Torah. Their forefathers swore at Mount Sinai to be faithful and loyal to me, and they're not doing it. And they're impressed with themselves because they're making a lot of money and they're militarily powerful and all this kind of stuff. Okay, they're not doing what they said they would do. So what is this that you have done? You're taking the hard road. Okay, so part of the hard road is Yahweh says right here, he says, "I will slay the last of them with the sword. He who flees from them will not get away, and he who escapes from them shall not be delivered." Work on the format there. So verse 8, drop down to verse 8. "Behold, the eyes of Adonai Yahweh are on the sinful kingdom." We talked before in the parashot about how Brother Judah is planning to take down the United States of America, which is the fulfillment of Jeremiah 50:51. Okay, and that actually will be a good thing. We're told, what I say, Revelation 18, we're told to rejoice when that happens. Okay, verse 8, "Behold, the eyes of Adonai Yahweh are on the sinful kingdom of Ephraim, and I will destroy it from the face of the earth. Yet I will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob," or Ephraim in this case, says Yahweh. And just to give a comment, so he's saying he will not utterly destroy the house of Jacob. So Jacob, our forefather Jacob, was a trickster. Yaakov, he grasps the heel. He's pulling your leg. Okay, so uh, are we trying to pull Yahweh's leg? We don't want to do, we want to say we're worshiping him, but we don't want to do what he says to do. That's trying to pull his leg. Okay. The next verse, he says, "For surely I will command and will sift the house of Israel among all nations." And I think as grain is sifted in a sieve, and yet not the smallest grain shall fall to the ground. And this is one of the things about the house of Ephraim in the United States of America. We just think of it as the center of everything. That's where the most punishment is going to occur. So we need to, whatever Yahweh says to do, we need to obey what we know. We need to obey what we know. Okay. Verse 10, because why? "Because all the sinners of my people shall die by the sword." Okay. All of the sinners of my people, meaning those who are breaking the Torah, those who are not fulfilling the Torah. We're talking about house of Israel, house of Ephraim, those who are not obeying the Great Commission, those who are performing the Great Omission. All those who don't get involved in relationship with Yeshua and enter into his program shall die by the sword, who say, nah, the calamity shall not overtake nor confront us. Verse 11. So he's talking here about a coming destruction. Okay, in context, can we see he's talking about a coming destruction? And he's going to provide a solution because he didn't kill all of the people. He just killed all the sinners of his people. So there will be, from our other studies, we think about 10%, because it's usually 10%, because there were 10 lepers and only one came back to give thanks. Josephus says about 10% believed. There's a big discussion on that. We'll talk about that some other time. Verse 11 says, on that day, in those end times, when things are starting to fall, when things are starting to deteriorate, when a stone is starting to be cut out of the mountain without hands that will come and smite the image on the feet. Okay, in those days, in those last days, Yahweh will raise up the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. He will repair its damages. He will raise up its ruins, and he shall rebuild it as in the days of old. Okay, why? That they may possess the remnant of Edom, Val pointed differently, you get Adam, and all the returning Gentile Ephraimites who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who does this thing. Well, verse 14, he says, I will bring back the captives of my people Israel. They're presently lost in the Babylonian system. They're lost in Mystery Babylon. They're lost in the United States of America, many of them. They're lost in that whole system of the strong exploiting the weak that Yahweh doesn't like. He says, they shall build when he brings back the remnant, the ones that perform his commandments and do them, he will bring back the remnant of Ephraim, and the remnant of Ephraim shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. The remnant of Ephraim shall plant vineyards and drink wine from them. The remnant of Ephraim that performs his commandments and does them and gets involved, obeys Yeshua's commandments, does everything he says to do. It takes getting involved. They shall also make gardens and eat fruit from them. And when they start to obey me, and when they start to obey my son, and when they start to do all the things that my son said to do, that's when I will gather them and I will plant them in their land. And no longer shall they be pulled up from the land which I have given them, says Yahweh, your Elohim. And now we see these same words right here in Maaseh, or Acts chapter 15. So they're having this big discussion. So first the message was to Jews only. And then when mainstream Judaism rejected the message, and probably in the days of the formation of the Birchat Haminim, so we had to form our own assemblies. But before that, in Acts chapter 11, you have, for first Acts 10, you have Cornelius, it's the first Gentile being brought in. Then you have Acts 11, you have a bunch of what today we would probably call Reform Jews, so Hellenistic Jews in the dispersion, probably reading the Septuagint. So they're, well, anyway, we'll talk about that some other time. We're starting to see we're starting to see the great falling away into the Gentile world that would later be controlled by Esav. Esav would bring Ephraim back into covenant, and 1,260 years later, we would escape. Praise Yahweh. So after this, Yaakov is saying, and with this, the words of the prophets agree, just as is written. He's quoting Amos. After this, I will return and will rebuild the tabernacle of David, which has fallen down. I will rebuild its ruins and I will set it up, so that the rest of mankind, you could also Edom, you could also vowel point it differently, but they chose so that the rest of mankind may seek Yahweh, even all the Gentiles, even all the returning Gentile Ephraimites who are called by my name, says Yahweh, who does all these things. So this is something that they knew they were supposed to do. They understood what the purpose was, but when the faith went from inside the land of Israel, Judea, The house of Judah understands the purpose of the Torah as a marital covenant. They're not giving up their marital covenant. And you have a lot of people out there who are practicing other forms of worship that Yeshua himself did not practice. And it messes everything up because Judah looks at that. Judah looks at Asaph. Judah looks at a messianic, a disorganized kind of a spirit. And they're like, it's the same woman in a different dress. We don't like that spirit here. Judah's had a lot of problems with the Asavite spirit. In these end times, praise Yahweh. Yahweh's bringing other things about. But the most important thing for Ephraim is to differentiate ourselves from Asaph. And the way we do that is to set ourselves apart from Asaph, to set ourselves apart from the world. We have to, don't raise your children to worry about T-ball. Raise your children to worry about the day of judgment. Train them to keep the day of judgment always before their eyes. And the best thing you can do for that is to listen. It's again and again. It's as simple as I can make it. Listen for his voice. Do what he says, including all of his written commandments, because that's what he wanted from the beginning. So now we're going to come to our renewed covenant, Brit Chadasha portions. First, we have Korinthim Aleph, or 1 Corinthians chapter 6 and verse 1. Now, this is one of the things. It says, dare any of you, having a matter against another, go to law or have lawsuits before the unrighteous, or going to law at a worldly court, and not before the set-apart ones. Now, what I want you to notice about this assumes a framework of set-apart ones. This assumes an actual brotherhood. And if you think about how Judah is today, okay, that's how the house of Ephraim is supposed to be. Okay, Judah is bands or bonds, but they hold together. And because they hold together, guess what? They have a country, they have a military, they have nuclear weapon. Well, they can neither confirm nor deny, but they have an amazing intelligence service. And Zerah has financial control of the world. And when you have financial control, you pretty much have control of the world. And that's because Judah operates as a family. There's a lot of Japheth injected into the Shemite model, but shouldn't generalize like that. Yahweh wants a family. He wants us to operate as a family. And this is the purpose of the single foundation of apostles and prophets, is to provide just exactly for this kind of thing. So when you have a family, hopefully, if you come from a good family, you have family justice. Or if you come from a dysfunctional family, perhaps there's not such good justice. But if we can imagine, we read the pages of the renewed covenant, okay, we are supposed to learn to walk just exactly as Yeshua walked. That's what it means to graft into the Jewish root. It's like you're not going to graft into the Jewish root if you don't graft in to the Jewish root, if you don't change your ways, if you don't set yourselves apart from the world in which we were born, especially, I think, for people in the developed world, Europe, United States, Canada, the British Empire, Protestantism. It's very easy to think of ourselves as being these very civilized and, we're missing out. Okay, if you're making judgments and you're doing things other than speaking to the men, as the priest of the household, you have to ask Yahweh to help you train yourself to hear his voice. And when you do that, what you will come to know is as it says in verse 2, it says, do you not know that the saints the set apart ones, those who set themselves apart from the world, from the pleasures of unrighteousness, they are the ones who will judge the world. Okay, and if the world will be judged by the set apart ones, are you unworthy to judge even the smallest matters? So you're going to go to court of law before Asaph. You're going to go to court of law, and the difficulty is there's no framework. So when you read the Torah, we talk about this in the Covenant Relationships collection. it's assumed that there will be a brotherhood. And because Judah behaves like brothers, they have a country. Because Judah behaves like brothers, they have a stick. Okay. And I know many of us, that's the joke. It's 95% of all families are dysfunctional, and the other 5%, they can't find them. So, you may have problems in your household, you may have problems in your family, but if you're a good priest of the household, you're trying to lead your family in the service of Yahweh, in the way of Yahweh. That means joining the brotherhood. That means fulfilling the Great Commission. That means helping to form the stick of Joseph. That means find a need and fill it. That means some courageous men who are going to stand up and say, you know what? That is what Scripture says. We do need to be busy doing this. We do need to be active in this. Okay, how do we know that we're going to be the ones to judge the world? It says in Daniel 7 and verse 27, it says, so this is when the stone's been cut out of the mountain without hands, smiting the image on the feet, the mystery Babylon statues falling. Okay, this is the cup judgments. Then the kingdom, trumpet 7 is when the judgment is proclaimed, and then there's the cup judgments. And then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven, okay, the entire Babylonian system, every Babylonian government that exists, that kingdom and dominion and greatness shall be given to the people, the set apart ones, the saints, the Kedoshim of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Now, what that says to me is we need to set ourselves apart from the world because we are called to a higher purpose. We'll talk about this in the Abraham Accords series, but there's a multi-step process for Tikkun HaOlam. And first thing is for the house of Ephraim to form the stick of Joseph in the house of Ephraim, so then we can get it together with the house of Judah. And then together, that Genesis 35 alliance, maintaining Manasseh in the dispersion, that Genesis 35 alliance is extremely powerful. When you put both Judah and Joseph together, you've got the network and you've got, Skynet, the control grid. That is extremely powerful when it's dedicated to Yahweh according to his voice, according to his words, according to his ways. That's all he's going to bless. Now, if we will do that, we talk about this in the Torah government study and in other studies, there's a structure for the order of kings and priests, the order of Melchizedek. There's a structure spoken of. We're talking about a foundation of apostles and prophets or apostles and elders. And then you've got the unification, everyone, no matter what gifting you have, no matter whether your gifting is apostolic, prophetic, evangelical, pastoral, or your teacher, supposed to all work together to build the single network, the single kingdom, the single organization, remembering we serve the Lion of Judah. Okay, so 1 Corinthians, Korinthim Aleph, chapter 6 and verse 9. Do you not know that the unrighteous, righteous, that means a commandment keeper, a tzaddik. Okay, so we're talking about the non-commandment keepers, the unrighteous, the non-kedoshim will not inherit the kingdom of Elohim. Okay, don't deceive yourself. Do not be deceived. Don't kid yourself. Don't fool yourself. Don't lie to yourself. Now get this list. It continues on the next page. Neither fornicators, people who are sleeping together, they're not married. That's not of Elohim. Nor no matter what the Talmud says, nor idolaters, no matter what Asaph says, including the Messianic movement, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners will inherit the kingdom of Elohim. Because they're not listening, they're not here, they're not submitted, they're not in connection with the vine. Okay, here's another telltale sign. It's one of the worst things. Verse 18, flee sexual immorality. Flee it. Get away from it. Guard your thoughts. Think about the things above. Don't think about the flesh below. Every sin that a man does happens outside his body. You're going to sin against outside of your body. But if you commit sexual immorality of any kind, you're sinning against your own body. That's why Acts 15 prohibits it. It's a parallel. So he knows this. Bamidbar, or Numbers, we'll get to in Parasha Balak, chapter 25, starting in verse 1, says, Now Israel remained in Acacia Grove, and the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. So they couldn't defeat us militarily. You couldn't curse us. So get us to commit harlotry. Okay, we're not setting ourselves apart. Well, first you get involved with an amorous sense, and then you get married and you sin. So verse 2, they invited the people to the sacrifices of their false gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their false gods. So you really guard your thoughts. Guard your thoughts. Keep your mind on the things above. Verse 19, or do you not know that your body is the temple of the set apart Spirit who is in you, whom you have from Elohim, and you are not your own? I don't know how many Messianics I know. They do not know that they are not their own. Brother, do you know that you are not your own? Sister, do you know that if you belong to Yeshua, you are not your own? You don't get to do your own will. You don't get to say, oh, wow, I think it'd really be nice to go roller skating. Okay, that's not it. I think it'd be really nice to go flying kites in the wind. Okay, that's not it. That's not serving Elohim. I knew one brother, like they had a Christian motorcycle club. They would just ride around, stop somewhere for lunch, eat lunch. They all had their jackets on. Like, this builds the kingdom, does it? How does this build the kingdom? I'm not getting it. Do people understand? Verse 20, it says, for you were bought with a price. We were bought with blood. Therefore, glorify Elohim in your body and in your spirit, which are Elohim's. And if I had to pick one thing that Ephraim does not get, they don't understand. If you call yourself Yeshua's servant, if you call yourself Yeshua's slave, if you call yourself Yeshua's slave princess candidate, if you call yourself Yeshua's Proverbs 31 bridal candidate, remember, you're not done. It's a candidate process, and he promises only a few are going to make it. Because why? Because only a few are going to set themselves apart. There's a broad, easy road, and many will enter in thereby. But narrow and afflicted is the pathway that leads to life. It's not so much fun, but that's the pathway that builds Yeshua's kingdom. And he knows it's difficult, because if it was easy, everyone would do it. How does that set us apart? We have to set ourselves apart by showing him our willingness to lay down our lives in this world to build his kingdom. So we come now to Galatim, or Galatians chapter 5, starting in verse 1. And we get a lot of questions on this. This is interesting. He says, stand fast. Now, we'll talk about Shaul. Yeah, we'll talk about Shaul. He says, stand fast in the liberty by which Messiah has made us free, and do not be entangled again with a yoke of bondage. And I believe here he's talking about the Zugot mentality that later became the rabbinical order, that later became the Talmud. So we're talking about man-made traditions of men, like we talked about in all these rules, all these additions to Yahweh's word, all these subtractions from Yahweh's word, all these replacements for Yahweh's word, establishing our own system of justification. Okay, don't get caught up in that. And someone needs to give the Messianics, especially the rabbinic Messianics, someone needs to give the rabbinic Messianics the memo. They lost Acts chapter 15. Okay, they lost that. We have a study on that about Yeshua rebukes the rabbis. It's in the Nazarene Israel study on the website. We'll talk about that again in the Abraham Accords series. But we're going to talk about Shaul here. He says, indeed, I, Shaul, I, Paul, say to you that if you become circumcised, Messiah will profit you nothing. Now, I want to be careful what I say and how I say this, but Asaph does misunderstand. And since Ephraim was in the house of Esau for 1,260 years, we've learned Esau's ways. We've only been trying to get free of Esau for a little over 500 years now, a little more than 10 Jubilee cycles. So 2017 was the 10 Jubilee anniversary from 1517. So it's still a very recent thing for us. So we have a study. There's a lot of questions about Shaul and his ministry. One moment. But thank you. So Nazarene Scripture Studies, Volume 2, we have a study about Shaul's ministry and explains the common points that people misunderstand, what Shaul said. And this is where we get into this whole thing about jokes about the Bible with the words of Paul in red and things like this. People using Shaul's words to explain away Yeshua and Yeshua's words to explain away Elohim just makes no sense. But Shaul is talking here. He's talking about, well, hold on a second. He's talking here about if you become circumcised, Messiah will be of no use to you. Okay, now what does he mean by circumcised? Now, I believe if you talk to the Amish, like they will call someone like me English. Say, well, no, I'm American. Yeah, or I'm an Israelite. Is what I am. That's what I really am. But I suppose my worldly nationality would be American, but they would call me English because that's the language I speak. So they have different uses of terms, and as you get to know Orthodox culture, they have their own specific uses of terms, and it kind of creates a confusion. So it's very important to read things with the first century eyes of Shaul, who was raised as a Pharisee. He was raised as a Haredi, basically what we would call Shaul today. He was a Haredi who got called to turn back to Elohim rather than do his own thing as a man. So he has different uses of terms, just like the rabbis do today. The rabbinical lexicon is different than other lexicons. So Galatim or Galatians chapter 2 and verse 7, he says, but on the contrary, when they saw that the good news for the uncircumcised had been committed to me. So he's talking about uncircumcised Gentiles. It's like a slang term. It's idiomatic language here. So he's talking about when they saw that the good news to the Gentiles, who in general are uncircumcised, had been committed to me, as the good news for the circumcised was committed to Kepha or Peter. So the good news to the Orthodox, to the Haredi, to the Haredim, those who believe that you are justified by the works of your hands, those who believe that you follow the rabbinic giur process or the Gentile conversion process, and then the final step is that you become circumcised. Okay, it's a mindset. In other words, how do you get your justification? What's Yahweh going to justify or not justify you for in the day of judgment? Rabbinical Judaism or Talmudic Judaism or Zugot Judaism, basically there's this focus on the works of men. It's focus on the works of our own hands. So did we follow this rabbinical procedure to the letter? If so, good, we're saved. Yahweh's going to approve in the day of judgment. And that's very different. And what Yeshua is saying is, get rid of all that. Just forget all that. Okay. Did you listen for Yahweh's voice? And did you do what Yahweh's voice is recorded to have said? Did you change your life to be in accordance with his word instead of making up some phony, baloney, messianic, Babylonian religion or Orthodox Jewish religion to where you do what you want and pass it off as if it's the worship of Yahweh? This is a big problem. We'll talk about Ishmael in the Abraham Accord series. But he's saying the good news to the uncircumcised Gentiles had been committed to me, and then the good news to the Haredim had been committed to Peter. Okay, verse 8, for he who worked effectively in Kepha for the apostleship to the circumcised, to the Haredim, to the Orthodox, to the Pharisees, also worked effectively in me toward the Gentiles. Okay, so he's equating uncircumcised with Gentiles and circumcised with Zugot, Talmudic, Rabbinic Judaism. Verse 3, and I testify again to every man who becomes circumcised, meaning you're going to think that you're justified by performing the rabbinic procedure, okay, that he's a debtor to keep the whole Torah. And this is one of these passages that's easy to misunderstand. It's easy to take the wrong impression from this, and that's exactly what Asaph does. It says, I testify again to every man who becomes physically circumcised, is what they think, but that's not what he's saying, who becomes orthodox in your mindset, who becomes Pharisaic in your mindset, that you're saved by the works of your hands. If you think you're saved by the works of your hands, verse 4, you become estranged from Messiah. You're attempting to justify yourself by works of Torah, by works of your hands. Okay, and you because of that, you've fallen from his favor. You've fallen from grace. And people misunderstand what this means because the works of Torah, it's kind of like, well, is he saying if you keep the Torah of Moshe, you've fallen from favor, you've fallen from grace? And that's not what he's saying. What he's saying is the Pharisaic or the rabbinic mindset is that you follow these procedures. Like today, they have the Giur process, the Gentile conversion process. And you have to follow these steps, and then you're considered saved. The final culminating act is you become physically circumcised, and now you're good to go. Okay, well, that's not how it went in the renewed covenant. So they had that big discussion in Acts 15. It's like, well, Elohim is not blessing the rabbinic procedure. Elohim is acting a different way. Okay, so what are we going to do? We're going to go back to the rabbinic procedure. Okay, if we're going to go back to the rabbinic procedure, then verse 4, then we become estranged from the spirit of Messiah because we're attempting to justify ourselves by our own man-made procedures of Torah, and therefore we've fallen from his favor or his grace. And in that study, we talk about verses like 2 Peter, Kepha chapter 3, starting in verse 15. So he's talking about Shaul. He says, and consider the long suffering of our Adon, our master, is salvation, as also our beloved brother Shaul, according to the wisdom given to him, has written to you, as also in all of his epistles, speaking in them some of these things in which are some things hard to understand. So Shaul is easy to misunderstand. He says, which untaught and unstable people twist to their own destruction, as they do also the rest of the scriptures. So he's calling Shaul's writings scriptures, but he's saying that there are untaught and unstable people, even in the first century, even as Kepha's alive. Okay, you've got a lot of what today we would call Messianic Jews. Okay, they're not organized. They're not doing everything Yeshua said to do, or Hellenistic Jews, Reform Jews. Okay, they're not doing things from the Hebraic mindset. They're not entering into that relationship. It's one of the things Orthodox Judaism does great. They enter into relationship. They just have to swap out relationship with themselves for relationship with Yahweh. But in this first century, we'll talk about this in the Abraham Accord series, you had untaught and unstable people. We read about Mark 9 and verse 38, where you have people who are they're following, they're casting out demons in Yeshua's name, but they're not following him. We'll talk about that in other places. Verse 17, Kepha says, you therefore, beloved, since you know this from beforehand, okay, since you already know Shaul is easy to misunderstand, since you already know it's easy to not get what Shaul's trying to say, and maybe myself, I don't know how to communicate, so it's hard for me to communicate. I don't know. I'm just not trying to compare myself, but I can relate to this. He says, beware lest you also fall from your own steadfastness, being led away with the error of the wicked. So, well, what's he talking about? Error of the wicked. So we come here to Strong's Greek, because that's the full canon we have is in Greek. We believe in the Hebraic inspiration, but comes Strong's Greek 113 is athesmos. So it's a thesmos, okay, not lawful. So he says from G1, a as a negative particle, not, and a derivative of Greek 5087 in the sense of enacting, lawless. So Peter is telling us not to be led away with the error of the lawless, not to be led away with lawlessness, not to be led away with Torahlessness, as so many in Asaph are. as so many in the Ephraimite and Messianic movements are, because they're not doing everything Yeshua said to do. They're trying to live their lives in the world in Yeshua's name because they're not willing to enter into this family national relationship, which is what Yeshua wants. I mean, Judah gets it. Judah understands the need to form community. Ephraim, it's like, no, 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 no. We were tied to Japheth a long time ago. We have to jump from Japheth to Shem, so to speak. We have to, we'll talk about that more in the Abraham Accord series. Galatim or Galatians chapter 5 and verse 11, another verse that's very difficult, very easy to misunderstand. He says, and I, brethren, if I still preach physical circumcision as a means of salvation, okay, if I'm still, I was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. If I'm still preaching works of your hands as a means of salvation, as Orthodox Judah does today, following the rabbinical procedure, they did good. You followed the rabbis, you're justified. Okay, if I'm still preaching that, why am I suffering persecution by the rabbis? Okay, if I wasn't suffering persecution, then the offense of the cross or the stake, whichever you prefer, has ceased. Okay, so he's saying Yeshua shall be a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel. So obviously Judah is offended, but Ephraim is going to end up being stumbled because Ephraim doesn't want to walk as Yeshua walked. And that's the requirement. How are we going to graft into Yeshua if we don't learn to walk like he walked? How are we going to go with him to his father's house if we don't learn to walk like he walked? If we're not eager to walk like he walked, how are we going to do that? No, Yeshua, I don't really want your program, but I'm not going to do what you say, and I'm not going to be a soldier for you and help reestablish the original, what your father always wanted in the garden. I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm not going to hear your voice. I'm not going to do what you say. I'm just going to receive the blessings. You're still going to vouch for me, right? You're still going to stick up for me in the day of judgment, right? Well, verse 13, he says, for you, brethren, you've been called to liberty. Okay, you've been called to liberty. You're under the order of Melchizedek. You don't have a blood altar. You're not in the land. It's different. You have to listen in the spirit and obey in the spirit for the purpose of investing your mina wisely to gain more minas for your master or help someone who is doing that. Okay, but don't use your liberty from the written commandments as an opportunity for the flesh. I mean, doing your own thing, going to the beach, going hiking, going roller skating, watching movies, playing poker with your friends, flying in your airplanes, riding horses, things that don't help build Yeshua's kingdom. How are you helping Yeshua to grow his kingdom if you're not helping Yeshua to grow his kingdom? I don't understand. It does not compute. Okay, do not use your liberty as an opportunity to do what you want, but through love, serve one another. People are like, what do you mean serve? No, serve in the biblical sense, meaning surely reprove your neighbor and bear no sin because of him if he's not helping to build Yeshua's global unified kingdom on a single foundation of apostles and prophets, according to the fivefold ministry. Rebuke him. Okay, that's serving him. Do we understand the relationship? He's talking Tehillim or Psalms 119 and verse 45. Okay, this is the law psalm. This is the Torah psalm. Right here in verse 45, he says, and yet I will walk at liberty from the letter of the law. Why? Well, King David's a prophet. He seeks Yahweh's precepts. He listens for Yahweh's voice, and Yahweh tells him what to do. So therefore, he's not bound to the letter of the procedure because he's following the Spirit in a realistic sense. That's why he could serve as the priest in the Tabernacle of David. So coming back to Galatim 5 and verse 14, he says, Shehu says, for all the Torah is fulfilled in one word. Now, this is like condensed. For all the Torah is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And there's a famous saying about Rabbi Hillel. This is about as condensed as it gets, but what this relies upon, I mean, how do you love your neighbor? And this is something, it's in the popular culture right now also. How do you love your neighbor? Okay. That's what the Hebrew block logic comes from. That's why you shall surely reprove your neighbor when he's breaking Torah and bear no sin because of him. But in the Ephraimite movement, it's so bad. How bad is it? It's so bad. A man divorces his wife. Everyone shuts him out for a year. And then after a year, he gets someone else pregnant, another Messianic sister pregnant. And then within a couple of years, he's leading his own congregation. You have radio stations that just say, yeah, whoever, if you're selling books for us, if you're selling advertising, come on. That's messianism. You think that really builds the kind of kingdom Yeshua wants? Brothers and sisters, if we want to go home, we have to build the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim. And what that means is everyone who loves Yeshua, everyone who wants to serve Yeshua needs to get involved. Okay, I understand some people have busy lives. Some people, I don't know, the professional, like doctors, lawyers, businessmen, some of them, they work incredibly long hours, continuing education, these kinds of things. But if Yeshua is the love of our life, if Yeshua is the love in our hearts, if we understand he is Mashiach Nagid, he's Mashiach the director, Mashiach the prince, are we doing what he says? If our neighbors are not, do you want your neighbor to survive the tribulation? And if so, what are you doing to help him? Are you helping to reach the 10% and bring them into obedience to Yeshua, who is in obedience to his Father? What are we doing, brothers? What are we doing? We just talked about this. Lock logic. If you love them, you have to help discipline them and raise them up, just like your children. If you're a spiritual elder, if you're a minister especially, if you're a spiritual elder, what are you doing to help form the stick of Joseph in the hand of Ephraim on a single foundation of apostles and prophets according to a fivefold unified ministry? How are you helping to set yourself and your family apart? How are you helping to set others in the community apart from the messianic mess, from the same woman in a different dress? Verse 16, he says, I say then, walk in the Spirit, listen for his voice, do what he says, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. Because the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit lusts against the flesh, because we're talking polar opposites. We're talking matter and antimatter. We're talking heavenly will versus Satan's will manifested through our flesh. These things are contrary to one another. The spiritual and the physical, they're at odds. So you do not do the things that you wish. Are we setting ourselves apart from our flesh? I suppose I should put the slide up. Are we setting ourselves apart from our flesh? Or are we following our flesh? When we want to go to the movies, when we want to go hiking, we want to go down to the pool, we're going to have a pool put in. Okay. Is that what Yahweh wants us to do with our money? Is that what Yahweh wants us to do with his time? Because we're no longer our own. Okay. That's what it means to walk in the Spirit. If you're listening to Yeshua, you're in connection with the vine, he'll tell you what to do. If you're not hearing his voice, keep asking him, keep knocking, keep seeking. Okay. In verse 18, he says, but if you are truly, genuinely led by the Spirit, if you're truly, genuinely hearing his voice and doing what he says and helping to build his unified kingdom on a single foundation of apostles and prophets, apostles and elders, then you're not under the letter of the Torah. because that pertains to when we live in the land of Israel after we get the stick of Joseph formed in the hand of Ephraim, and Joseph is unified back with Judah after Armageddon. But there's things to do in the meantime. Okay, we're not, excuse me, I didn't mean to misspeak before. We're not just sitting this temple out. Okay, we're busy this temple. We have to be expanding the network. Okay, if you're led by the Spirit, if you're genuinely listening for Yahweh's voice, you're not under the Torah for justification or salvation. And the example that they use a lot is they say, what's the difference? So you've got the law, you've got the rules of the road, so to speak. Okay, but if you're paying attention to the policeman, okay, the policeman might direct you to go some other way. Okay, so always be paying attention to the policeman, but you certainly don't want to be following the rules of the road and then ignoring the policeman when the policeman say, no, I know the signs say this, but don't go that way because there's an accident. And you're like, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm going to drive right ahead. And that's what we do. We're not listening to the Spirit, and we're trying to drive according to the rules of the road. And then Judah is replacing the rules of the road with his own rules of the road. So one, you got Ephraim's disobedient drivers, and two, you got Judah. They've got their own system. So, but the question is justification. How are we justified? Are we justified because we hear and then obey and do everything that's written? Or are we justified because we read everything but didn't want to do it? Or are we justified because we wrote up our own law code and we're that smart? Because we're misapplying our kingly and priestly powers. So how are we judging ourselves to be justified? Okay, Acts 15 says, hear his voice, obey it. That's it. There's in the dispersion, you're not under the sacrificial law because we don't live in the land. And there's not a cleansed temple. And the next temple won't be clean. Galatim or Galatians 5 and verse 19, he says, now it's the opposite, because the works of the flesh are evident. Okay, now this is how you know you're not walking in the Spirit. Okay, if you have adultery, you have fornication, just fornication. Okay, you're having relations, but you're not married. Okay, if you're unclean, you're doing things that are unclean, you're eating foods that are unclean, you're not paying attention to Yahweh's word. If you're lewd, I've heard lewd jokes from Messianics. I've heard crude jokes from Messianics. Verse 20, idolatry, talking crosses, stars of David, menorah fish, all kinds of things that are more T-ball, vacations, rental property, things that are more important than obeying Yahweh and obeying his Torah. Sorcery, I've seen that, also in Judah. Hatred, plenty of that in the house of Ephraim. Contentions, plenty of that in the house of Ephraim. Jealousies, plenty of that in the house of Ephraim. Outbursts of wrath, plenty of that in the house of Ephraim. Selfish ambitions. Let's talk about some of these messianic ministers docking down 6 figures a year, getting married, getting divorced, never stepping down, teaching you don't need to organize, you don't need to obey what Yeshua said to do, you don't need to obey what Shaul said, you don't need to obey Ephesians 4, Ephesians 2. Talk about selfish ambitions. Dissensions. We're dissenting from the Torah. No, we don't have to enter in. We don't have to do what Yeshua said to do. No, you don't need to organize. No, you don't need to organize. No. Heresies. Yeah, no, you don't need to obey what the new covenant says to do. No, you don't have to do that. No. Okay. Envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, partying. Okay. Are you working for Yahweh? Are you a voluntary slave? A few hundred years ago in Europe, if you weren't serving your king, guess what would happen? If you weren't faithful and loyal to your king, guess what would happen? In King David's time, if you weren't faithful and loyal to your king, guess what would happen? Okay, if you're going to be that way, you're going to be dissolute, you're going to party, play around, you're going to be serious, not going to take Yahweh's word serious, you're not going to help build the family. You won't inherit the kingdom of Elohim. It's that simple. He talks about the opposite then, verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace. These are the things that you do when you're listening to Yahweh, because Yahweh is light and love. So when you're listening to Yahweh, there's love, there's joy, there's peace, there's long suffering. You can be kind, you can be good, you can be faithful, you can be gentle, be direct and honest and truthful, but you can be gentle and loving about it. You can be self-controlled. There's no Torah against these things. Okay, these are the things, this is what happens when we're listening to Elohim. Like it says to err is human, but to forgive is divine. If you truly forget, you have to be in touch with Elohim. You have to be listening to Elohim, or you can't truly get the forgiveness. So, verse 24, it says, and those who are messiahs, those who have given their life up for Messiah, have crucified their flesh with its passions and desires to go hiking, to go flying, to go horseback riding, to go have fun, to go shopping, to go hunting. Okay. If you belong to Messiah, what do you want to do that stuff for? What do you care about hunting for? What do you care about shopping for? Are you doing these things for Yeshua? Or are you doing these things for yourself? Verse 25. If we live in the Spirit, let us listen in the Spirit, and then let us walk in the Spirit. Okay, at Ephraim, let us not become conceited, thinking we don't need to obey his word. We just need to read it. Provoking one another, envying one another. And I keep emphasizing, people ask about the importance of hearing the voice. And it's everywhere in scripture. It's just one of those things. Genesis, Bereshit 22 and verse 18. In your seed, Avraham, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because why? You obeyed my voice. 26 and verse 5. Because Avraham obeyed my voice and did what I said. He kept my charge, what I told him to do. He kept my commandments, what I told him to do. He kept my statutes and my laws. Shemot, Exodus 19 and verse 5. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be a special treasure to me above all people, for all the earth is mine. Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, 7 and verse 23. But this is what I commanded our forefathers when we left Egypt, saying, obey my voice. Just do that. Get in relationship with me. Listen for my voice and obey it. And then I will be your Elohim, and you shall be my people. But you also have to walk in all the ways that I have commanded you, that it may be well with you. 9 and verse 13, and Yahweh said, because they have forsaken my Torah, which I set before them, this house of Judah, they've forsaken my Tanakh, which I set before them, and they got into Talmud, they got into the Zugotville, okay, and they have not obeyed my voice. They're not listening to me. They're not listening, and they're not walking according to what I say or what is written. Jeremiah 11, verse 4, which I commanded your fathers in the day I brought them out of the land of Egypt from the iron furnace, saying, obey my voice and do according to all that I command you. That's how you can be my people, and I will be your Elohim, is if you set yourself apart from doing your own will. If you will submit yourself to doing my voice, to obey me. Be my Proverbs 31 bridal candidate. Jeremiah 11 and verse 7, for obey my voice. What do we have? So same with Yeshua, Yohanan or John, chapter 10 and verse 16. He says, and other sheep, he's talking to the house of Judah. He says, and other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, because that was Joseph's name. Yahweh shall add, Yehoseph. So Yahweh will add. So dispersed Joseph, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice. That's why everyone's talking about Yeshua, hearing the voice of the shepherd. He says, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. Okay, we've talked about this. We'll talk about it again every week. The plan is, first Ephraim needs to form a stick. Then we can have the Genesis 35 and verse 11 alliance. And then after that, then Ishmael can be brought in throughout the millennium. Esav, again, there's many, many good people in Esav. A lot of fallen sparks, Abrahamic sparks. They just need to be reached. So that's, again, why I'm just so thankful. I count this as a blessing, huge blessing, yeah, a huge opportunity. And I'd like to ask for everyone's prayers that Yahweh will please bless us in this, because if this, how should I say this? If this goes well, so if the presentation goes well, and this is the new Catholic policy, then it might even be open mic night in the cathedral, maybe sometime. So we're looking forward to that. Praise Yahweh. So let's come now to Vayikra, or Leviticus 19 and verse 2, where we started from. Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the children of Israel, both Judah and Joseph, and say to them, you shall be set apart, for I, Yahweh your Elohim, am set apart." He doesn't want us to do our own will. He doesn't want us to do the things of the world. What he wants us is to set ourselves apart from the things of the world by listening to his voice and keeping his bridal covenant, the Torah that he gave to all 12 or 13, if you prefer, tribes of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai. We hope you've enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for listening. Please pray with us that the house of Ephraim and the house of Judah will set themselves apart. In Yeshua's name, amen.